Welcome to The Explainer. Today we are investigating a really profound neurological detective story. We're drawing from this fascinating and honestly deeply moving paper by Professor Cole at Barangay University. We're looking at something almost all of us experience, but rarely actually understand, which is the tragic, sudden loss of childhood imagination during adolescence. I mean, have you ever wondered where those vibrant, sprawling worlds of your childhood actually went? Why, as we grow up, our minds so often shift from these playgrounds of infinite possibility to rigid chambers of anxiety and self-doubt? Well, Professor Cole's research suggests this isn't just a sad but normal part of growing up. It's actually an identifiable neurological event. Okay, let's dive right into this by first meeting the victim of our mystery, the paracosm. Now, a paracosm isn't just a fleeting daydream. It is a detailed, internally consistent fictional world that is created and maintained by an individual. If you ever invented a whole universe as a kid, complete with its own rules, characters, and histories, and you could just effortlessly disappear into it for hours, you had a paracosm. It's really the ultimate expression of human creative imagination. It's a spontaneous, self-generated reality that brings immense joy and meaning. But for so many people, this incredible cognitive ability simply vanishes.
And that brings us to a pretty stark realization presented in the source material. We often just write off the loss of this imagination as a standard phase of maturing, right? You just grow up. But Professor Cole points out that when this collapse of creative capacity is accompanied by anhedonia, which is the loss of pleasure, along with rumination and depressive symptoms, it's not typical development at all. It is a pathological reorganization of the brain's neural systems. The brain literally rewires itself in response to deep emotional distress, completely shutting down its ability to generate these imaginative worlds.
Which leaves us with our central high-stakes question for today. Where exactly does our childhood imagination go? What specific mechanisms in the adolescent brain trigger this catastrophic collapse, killing off these vibrant inner worlds and replacing them with a rigid, highly self-conscious reality? To solve this mystery, we really have to look under the hood at how the brain actually generates creativity in the first place. Section 1. The baseline. Brain networks of creativity. Let's start by establishing the baseline. We need to meet the neurological heroes of our cognitive flexibility to understand what a healthy, creatively engaged brain actually looks like. Creativity doesn't just live in one area of the brain. It relies on this incredibly delicate dance between two massive neural networks. First up, we have the default mode network, or DMN. Think of this as your brain's internal simulator. It handles self-referential thought, spontaneous mind wandering, and scene construction. It is the engine of the paracosm. On the other side, we have the executive control network, or ECN, which is sometimes called the task-positive network. This handles goal-directed, externally focused attention and critical evaluation. Basically, it's your inner editor. Now, you might think creativity is all DMN, just pure daydreaming. But the research shows true creativity absolutely requires both, the DMN to generate the spontaneous ideas and the ECN to loosely evaluate and refine them. The secret ingredient here is what we call the toggling concept. To be highly creative, your brain literally has to act like a master DJ, rapidly crossfading between these two networks. A massive 2025 study by Chen and colleagues actually proved that the frequency of this dynamic switching between the DMN and the task-positive network reliably predicts creative originality. You need segregation to keep the networks distinct, integration to coordinate them, and most importantly, flexibility to transition fluidly between generating an idea and evaluating it. When this toggling is working smoothly, your imagination thrives. Section 2. The inciting incident. The adolescent threat response. So here is where we hit the inciting incident of our story. We enter adolescence. And with adolescence comes a sudden, intense influx of chronic social threats. We're talking things like bullying, peer victimization, intense social judgment, or even unstable, unsafe environments at home. This is where the biological vulnerability really begins. And this brilliantly illustrates the core developmental mismatch that sets up our whole tragedy. During puberty, the amygdala, which is the brain's primary threat detection alarm system, undergoes massive maturation. It gets a major power-up, becoming highly sensitized to social threats. Meanwhile, the ventromedial prefrontal cortex, or VMPFC, which is supposed to provide top-down regulation and tell the amygdala, hey, we're safe, calm down, is still under construction. It's developmentally delayed compared to the amygdala. So, think about what happens when you introduce a chronic social threat, like relentless bullying or an unpredictable family life, into a brain with a hypersensitive alarm system and a weak regulatory system. The amygdala becomes chronically hyperactive. Over time, it actually decouples entirely from the VMPFC's safety signals. The brain becomes locked into a permanent state of hypervigilance. It is constantly scanning for danger, completely unable to feel safe, even when the person is just, say, sitting alone in their bedroom.
Section 3. The climax. A locked default mode. Let's move to and see how this builds, step by step. How does a hyperactive threat response actually reach across the brain to destroy the imaginative paracosm? Well, it happens through a tragic cascading effect right into the default mode network. First, as we established, the amygdala hyperactivates and decouples from those safety signals. Second, this chronic alarm state bleeds into a core hub of the default mode network called the anterior medial prefrontal cortex, or MPFC. Now, the anterior MPFC handles self-evaluation, and under chronic threat, it rigidifies. It locks up. Third, because this node is rigidly locked up, the brain completely loses its ability to toggle between the DMN and the ECN. Remember our DJ? The crossfader gets completely jammed. And finally, step 4, the posterior DMN, the part of the brain that actually constructs scenes and visualizes imaginary worlds, gets actively suppressed. The brain essentially decides that daydreaming is a dangerous distraction from monitoring threats. Now, what's really interesting about this is what this rigidification actually feels like from the inside. When the anterior MPFC gets stuck, it acts like a broken record, looping a highly toxic form of identity threat. It completely stops playing with ideas and starts obsessively evaluating the self. It generates this continuous, rigid loop of rumination. Am I safe? What do others think of me? Am I being judged? The flexible, playful self-reflection required for creativity is completely replaced by a paralyzing, anxious self-interrogation. This creates a fundamental shift in how we experience ourselves. To maintain a paracosm, you absolutely need implicit selfhood. When you are a child lost in a fantasy world, you aren't thinking about yourself. You are the transparent subject of the experience, entirely immersed in play. But the trauma of chronic social threat forces a shift to explicit selfhood. Suddenly, you become the hyper-aware object of your own evaluation. You are constantly monitoring how you're being perceived. You can no longer disappear into a fictional world because you just cannot escape the crushing gravity of your own self-consciousness. Section 4. The resolution. Awakening the imagination. This all paints a pretty grim picture of adolescence, doesn't it? But we aren't going to end this investigation in the dark. We need to pivot to the resolution. The incredible realization of Professor Quall's model is that the paracosm isn't dead. It is just buried under a hypervigilant security system. Because the loss of creativity is a network dysfunction, we can use targeted interventions to actually fix the network. By addressing the root causes, we can start to bring the imagination back online. Therapies like EMDR or trauma-focused CBT can regulate the threat system, calming down that hyperactive amygdala and rebuilding those vital safety signals. We can restore network toggling flexibility through meditation, mindfulness, and flow states. Embodied practices, think dance and music, can pull people out of that paralyzing explicit selfhood, shifting them back to implicit engagement. Interestingly, the research also notes that psychedelic therapies like psilocybin are showing profound success in doing exactly this, breaking up those rigid anterior MPFC loops and restoring network flexibility, which allows depressed individuals to finally reconnect with their creative capacity. So the crucial point is this. Your childhood imagination, your paracosm, your ability to create brilliant, vivid inner worlds, it is not gone. It hasn't been permanently erased by adulthood. It's merely suppressed. It has been locked away for your own protection by a brain that felt unsafe. And what is suppressed by trauma and threat can be powerfully, beautifully restored by safety and healing.